recognized for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How often does the CBO director come to Congress to testify?
I'm not aware of any time that he has. I assume that it's happened, but I sure haven't met the gentleman.
I've never seen him. How many times, so you've never met him? When did you get a copy of the CBO score?
It just came out yesterday, which is before we were even back in session, despite the fact that they've had this bill for several months.
Isn't that crazy? I mean, we struggle to get 3 days to read a bill here, and then on the last day, in the last 24 hours, the CBO comes up with something to throw everything out of whack.
Intentionally so, I would argue.
Would the gentleman yield to me for 1 second?
No, I heard plenty from you here earlier.
No, all right. I'll get her to yield to me.
Can somebody fix the audio? Are you an engineer?
Yeah. Don't put it close. I am now. Just don't put it so close.
Maybe we should get the CBO director to come to the Rules Committee.
It's probably not a bad idea.
How is the CBO director hired?
I understand that it is with the Speaker, and Speaker Pro Tem are the ones that make the decision to hire the CBO director, so we could change him.
And how long have we had this CBO director?
He's been there for a while, I believe. Just the brief research that I was able to do today after getting the 11th hour CBO score, I believe he's been there for several years.
It seems to me like over the last couple of years, we've had some really crazy arbitrary constraints put on us because of the CBO at the very last second. And they've had these bills for a long time, and then at the very last minute, they come in and say, oh, there's this or there's that, and then you have to conform to it.
I find it interesting that the CBO, whenever they score something, if you try to deregulate something or cut spending, they find a way to score that as spending more, whereas when you spend more, they try to say that that's going to save money. And I've got examples of different places and different areas where they have been so completely out of whack by 100%, 130%. For example, claiming that Medicaid expansion, their projected enrollment was 13 million. It ended up being 19.5 million. And that doesn't even include 16 of the states that they assumed would be increasing. So what you have with like Obamacare, they intentionally underestimated the number because they needed to keep it below $1 trillion because President Obama said he wouldn't sign anything that was over $1 trillion. So they manipulated the numbers in such a way to keep it under $1 trillion, but we all know that it's one of the biggest drivers of our deficit that we have right now, and that's largely because the CBO so dramatically failed to adequately calculate the cost of what Obamacare would do and what Medicaid expansion would do. That's just one example. I've got many examples where CBO has absolutely failed to adequately assess the cost. I think with the issue of getting rid of the Department of Education, for example, they claim it would cost millions and millions and millions of dollars to get rid of an agency. That makes no sense at all. You're getting rid of an agency that costs us $80 billion a year, and yet it's supposed to cost us more money if we get rid of it. That just is absurd.
I remember that example. That was one of my amendments I think it was to HR 2, which was whether the Department of Education should exist or not. And the CBO said it would cost more money to eliminate a department. And I think that has something to do about their time horizons or something. But do we ever hold them accountable when they forecast one thing and then they're off by a factor of 2?
Not that I can see, and in fact, as a civilian, before I became a member of this body, one of the things that always struck me was the way that they would score things. And those of us with common sense could see that their numbers were so far out of whack that they never made any sense. For example, when the challenge associated with Obamacare came up in 2010, and I remember it very well, we were looking at the numbers, and the numbers never did make sense. But again, they had to keep it under $1 trillion. So from my standpoint, it's become a very political organization that protects growing government, but never adequately assesses the value of cutting government. So we're always moving and ratcheting one way, which is to make government bigger and bigger and bigger, while they say, well, that's not going to cost us much money. But whenever you try to cut government, such as this, actually forcing the agencies to follow the RFA, they come up with these enormous numbers that make no sense because they're supposed to be complying with the law right now.
So I'm looking at some tweets that the CBO director made. One of these says basically every word Ted Cruz said about tax policy was wrong. Wonder if he was misleading on other things like his campaign loans. It sounds like a political hack, really.
That's not very bipartisan, is it? I wasn't aware of that.
And I believe this may have been before he was the CBO director, but it gives us some insight into what his political agenda is. He's got quite a few tweets here with a Politico journalist a few weeks before he was hired. The Politico journalist said in a letter Monday that was obtained by Politico, Fed Chairman Powell said the Fed's conversations with Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley before the release of the stress test results were, quote, procedurally identical to those that happen every year, unquote. And here we have the CBO director replying, a recent parallel, FHFA allowed GSE payments to HERA 2008 affordable housing funds despite earlier pledge to halt money on Treasury draw. Director Watt noted PSPA draw was one-off tax cut impact, so affordable housing money continued. I mean, I don't think we need a partisan person in the CBO. I think it's going to be counter to the mandate. The voters, this is the problem, right? Elections should matter. Mm-hmm. And here we've had an election, and we are the elected representatives. Each of us represents 750,000 people. Yet every week we come into this rules committee and we start considering, oh, what did this bureaucrat have to say about it? And can we do what we were elected to do? I think it's a preposterous notion if the people actually understood how much power we've given to the CBO director.
Well, I think that that's true, but I think there's another aspect of this that was pointed out by Representative Fischbach, and that is transparency and honesty. I guess that I find it a good thing when agencies are required to give legitimate information about the cost of the decisions that they're making, because we ultimately are the bosses. We're ultimately, and I don't mean we as Congress, I mean we as citizens. If the EPA is going to adopt a regulation that increases the cost of gasoline double, then don't we have the right to say we don't want that regulation? Don't we as citizens say that is a bad regulation and the EPA should not be able to impose that against us? I think the very first things that my colleague to the left just stated was that the citizens of this country are concerned about increasing gas prices, increasing housing prices, increasing food prices. Well, where does he think all those increases are coming from? The farmers aren't making the money. The oil and gas companies are going broke. It's the bureaucrats that are increasing the cost of food, housing, and energy. And in fact, every single decision almost that has come out of the Biden administration and their administrative agencies has been designed to increase the cost of food, housing, and energy. So the issue that we're addressing right here, which is a transparency and accountability issue, goes specifically to the issue of whether the citizens of this United States should be forced to pay $4.50 in gasoline when the actual cost should be about 2.5 gallons, but because of EPA and other regulatory requirements that are put in place, that's what the inflationary costs are. So just requiring these agencies to disclose the actual cost, whether it's to big business or small business, requiring these agencies to disclose the cost of the regulation should be absolutely rule number one. And I cannot imagine why anybody would be opposed to something like that.
Is there anything else you'd like to add before I yield back?
No, thank you.
I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
And by the way, somebody needs to adjust the audio. It's messed up on all the mics. You need to turn the gain down. Is there anybody in here that can do that?
I adjusted my hearing aids.
What are you?
Oh, yeah, that'll work.
Are you an engineer?
Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Scanlon, for questions.
I'll yield to Mr. McGovern.
Yeah, you know, listening to this exchange helps explain why people are so cynical about what we do up here. The gentleman raised the issue about, you know, when's the last time we saw the CBO director up here? Well, I'll tell you, on September 11th, he testified before the House Budget Committee, that he was up here. And many Republicans, including Dr. Burgess, actually submitted questions in writing to the CBO director. We're complaining about getting this at the last minute. You know when they were notified that you were bringing this bill up today? The Friday after Thanksgiving at around 5 p.m. That's when they found out. So, I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, and here it is, you got it yesterday. So that's, I mean, to suggest that somehow they wait till the last minute, we didn't even let them know we were taking up this bill until Friday after Thanksgiving at 5 p.m. And the other thing is, I mean, we in theory are supposed to support experts to give us analysis about what things cost. Otherwise, we're relying on Fox News or whatever Donald Trump decides to tweet about how much something's going to cost. We should appreciate the work that they do. And by the way, I want to submit for the record the Congressional Budget Office cost estimate, because it was implied here that, oh, they just give us this number and they don't tell us why. Well, they spell it out here. They explain what the estimated budgetary effects would mainly stem from, and they give you 3 concrete reasons and rationales of why there is a cost to this thing. It's not a secret. And by the way, I have had questions about CBO's analysis in the past. I actually called the CBO director and had a face-to-face meeting with him. Any member can do that. I don't know of anybody ever reaching out to them and not getting a return phone call and not being able to meet with them. But I get it. When it comes to bringing legislation forward, I get my Republican friends on the right, don't care about deficits and don't care about the debt. But some of us do. Because if you want a sound economy, we cannot allow deficits to get out of control. But I mean, this is a pretty simple explanation as to why this costs money. But to suggest that somehow no one ever sees CBO, it's like the Wizard of Oz. I mean, they testified before the Budget Committee. You want to have them come before the Rules Committee? We can invite them. I mean, I don't care. But don't slander the work of an important organization that, quite frankly, is aimed at making sure that our deficits don't get out of control and that we pay for things that cost money. I thank the gentlelady for yielding to me, and I yield back my time to her.
Thank you.